So, Berto, we have a big backlog of emails and questions for us to ask specifically. So let's get to it. What do you say?
Let's do it.
This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I'm an authentic coconut cracking consultant.
An authentic coconut cracking consultant. There's a lot of K sounds in that. So on Discord, our Discord server, we have a channel that says short pod questions or something. And these are questions for you and me.
Nice.
From that bit. Alex says, as someone who was a young adult in the 80s, what was everyone's hair styled big and fluffy like in the TV shows, movies, etc.? Well, I'll field that first since you moved to the States in 1989, 1990?
1990, yeah.
Right. So you could talk about, and of course, Columbia probably had similar stylings as Seattle did.
And I spent some summers here during the late 80s.
Right. And what I'll say is this is a very good but kind of complicated question that I will try to do justice without boring the listeners, which is that when you see depiction, if you didn't grow up in the 80s and you see a depiction of the 80s in a movie or TV show or something, it's always cartoonized. The people don't really look, might there have been one person that looked like the way they're depicting it? Sure. But there's a much more average look. And so that's one. Number two is when I think back to the 80s, all I can see is gigantic hair with lots of hairspray in very bad configurations. Because, of course, you have, a 15-year-old girl classmate of mine who, and this is before YouTube and Instagram and guides on how to do hair. You basically just had to watch a Madonna video and figure like, well, hopefully someone will pass the wisdom down so I can manage that with my hair, And there were a lot of people who didn't do it so well. And that's what I remember. But when I look, so that was always my memory. But when I actually look at my yearbook, and there's a lot of candid shots in the yearbook, just people walking around. People look so much more, I don't know, like just general. There are plenty of people, their outfits, their hair, you could put them in a yearbook today and they wouldn't look that different. Maybe a little bit different, but not that different. So was everyone's hair styled big and fluffy like the TV shows and movies? I would say no, because most people didn't have time for that. They just... the fashionable people, there was definitely a flock of seagulls contingent in my school. And I was actually kind of one of them. I was kind of one of the Depeche Mode flock of seagulls people. And then you had the metal people, and they tended to have like big hair. And then you had sort of the general people that are trying to pull off something that they shouldn't. And they might have like frosted tips and lots of gel, lots of hairspray. There was this one haircut that I remember noting in high school that I just marveled at how bad it was in girls, my friends. They basically, what looked to be, they woke up late for school, and then they would take hair gel or mousse or hairspray or whatever, and they would, it's hard to describe, but their bangs would go up and down. So part of their bangs would go straight up like a wall, and then another part of their bangs would go kind of puffed and down, and then their sides by their ears would go straight out, but then limp, because the hardness was just for a few inches, and then the hair would just fall down. And if you looked at the person directly from the front, it didn't look that bad. It looked kind of weird because there was a lot of evidence of hard chemicals in their hair. But it basically, from the front, you just looked like you had a lot of body in your hair, real voluminous. Like I always thought that all the girls were trying to be Brooke Shields, who had this, I don't know if it was natural, but she had very curly, long, luscious brown hair. I always thought everyone was trying to be like her, and hard to pull off because, of genetics and hair and makeup people. But anyway, the girls would turn to the side or turn around, and in the back, their hair was completely flat. So from the side, they look like, remember that dinosaur in Jurassic Park, the venomous one that sprays.
With the little things that go on the sides.
Yeah, that sprays Newman with acid or something. They look like that. And I remember thinking, they must be deceiving themselves, because when they're doing their hair in the morning, they only see themselves from the front.
So they think they look great.
Yeah. And you look around to the side, and it's just like, now, I will say that when I was a kid, I didn't actively evaluate people's hair. I probably just noted it as like, that's weird looking. But yeah, I do remember that. What do you remember about hair? And
it was very much mirrored in the 80s in Colombia. So all my female, and this was to the T. I mean, okay, sure. Is it 90% of them, I guess, that they had that hairstyle, man? They had the same thing. It was super puffed out on the sides. And you're right. And some of them, I have the pictures too to prove it. I don't understand how high, like how they could get it to go so high up on the front. And then, yeah, it had the little things on the little bangs. I didn't like it even back then. Now I look at it at the pictures, and I'm like, how did anyone ever think this looked okay?
Yeah, and it's not like I didn't have unfortunate haircuts in high school.
Oh yeah, no, I had terrible haircuts. I didn't even have a haircut. Yeah, because a lot of times my dad would like cut my hair, and it was not good.
Yeah, it wasn't until I was maybe in my 30s that I noticed that middle school, early high school, maybe late high school kids are focusing on fashion, not to customize it to themselves. They're trying to customize themselves to the fashion instead of the other way around, and thus will adopt hair and clothes options that just really don't suit them. And it wasn't until I was a lot older when I started to think, well, instead of trying to have hair like the hair I want to be, like the idols that I follow, maybe I should find a hairstyle that fits me, that I can pull off,
that you could do,
that is at least in the direction of the stylings I want to have.
Yeah, it's funny because in Colombia, I didn't actually have any capability to create a style or have a style. So I couldn't join one of the styles that were established
because your family was poor.
Yeah, I didn't have. So my mom would send me clothes from the U.S. So if anything, I would have accidentally cool clothes because my mom would be sending them from the United States, and so that was like usually either at or ahead of the curve of the fashion. So I'd have like the little Reebok pumps, before.
It's funny that your mom had access to like high Tacoma fashion and was sending it to
exactly. I'd get like Genera and OP and like all these,
Genera.
Town and Country. And
I think like, Genera was local, Seattle, Genera.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
And they were just neat clothes, but they were just normal. And Swatch, I had a Swatch watch, but I couldn't myself go out and pick these out.
Well,
so
it's
whatever
funny.
I would get sent.
You say you were poor and you didn't have fashionable clothes, but you just listed way more fashionable clothes than I had when I was
right because I did, because my mom sent it, but it wasn't like I went to the store. I said, Mom, I want one of those and one of these. It's just whatever would come in the mail, I would put it on.
Yeah, I would have killed for a Genera anything when I was in high school.
And so I did have cool things, but I never got to pick any of it until I was in high school and I had a job. And when I had a job, my friend Ron, is whom I was like, oh, I like what he's wearing. So I'd go and buy a rayon shirt and like slacks or something, and I would try to look a little new wavy, I suppose was the style.
Yeah.
But I never actually liked the idea of being like looking like I'm part of a team or a group. I just thought, oh, this is cool. I like silk shirts all of a sudden. But yeah, and then when I got to college, it was just a matter of, oh, I have money to buy things, so I'm just going to go to Eddie Bauer and buy stuff. But I never had a concept of, my style is such and such. It was always really ad hoc.
Mm. Alex also asks, what advice would you give to a psychiatry student if they want to be more knowledgeable or gain more skills in psychotherapy? Berto, what do you think? Just joking. So a psychiatry student, so in psychiatry training programs, which varies widely, there are opportunities typically to take classes and get supervision and psychotherapy, but it's not the majority of the training because it's a medical degree. You're going to med school, and there's biology and chemistry and medications and all those kinds of things. And so if you want to become good at psychotherapy as a psychiatry student, I would imagine it comes down to making sure you have good supervision, a supervisor in psychiatry who actually has a lot of experience in psychotherapy, because you could easily find a lot of supervisors who have very limited experience in that. Also gaining experience and also really trying to, find a group of people that other psychiatrists maybe that are very psychotherapy oriented. Mark Sapan says, I found a really interesting Reddit post that touches on a pattern of behavior I've seen. For those trying to move on from an ex, they are warning that substituting an obsession with that person for a fascination with their attachment style can stunt your detachment from the breakup. Did you follow that, Berto?
Yeah, a little bit, yes. That if you're... And basically, it's almost counterintuitive, right? Because you were... Like, when you're trying to get over a breakup, you would tend to do the opposite.
Yeah.
Right?
You so try to move on from them. But
yeah.
But I think
like,
it's
they say like cold turkey.
Yeah, which almost no one does. So anyone who listens to this podcast and has gone through a breakup while listening to this podcast has, I'm sure, done this, where they go through a breakup and they're, trying to move on, but they start to diagnose their past partner and their attachment style or other kinds of issues, schemas. And what Mark Sapan is saying is that it is, that touches on a pattern of behavior, that when people do this, it actually will stunt your ability to detach from the breakup. And, that's an oversimplification, of course. If people have research on that, I'd love to see it, but I'm sure they don't.
But isn't it similar to how, even if you're not doing it in that sense, if you have a breakup and you kind of mull it over and what went wrong, what did I do, what could I have done differently? I wonder if it's similar in that you are spending time still dwelling on the relationship and on the relationship that failed and blah, blah, blah. And so that might make it harder to get over. And similarly, if you're doing it in a, trying to diagnose kind of way.
Right. Yeah, I suppose it's possible, but the premise is usually false that as people grieve a breakup and it'll be on their minds and they'll want to talk about it and they will think about it involuntarily or voluntarily, that somehow it's this voluntary holding on to and quote unquote dwelling on process that holds them back. Grief lasts a long time, and it involves the mind and the brain and the soul and the spirit, and we will manifest that by thinking about and mulling things over, trying to make meaning. To diagnose your past partner after a breakup is a way of finding meaning, a source of meaning that I have found quite comforting throughout my life in situations like that and otherwise. It helps me to frame what happened. Attachment styles imply the person was trying but was being triggered and made mistakes, and it meshed with you in a certain way. And of course, mulling over how your attachment style also played a role can really help and to provide a narrative that is healing or at least satisfying such that you can move on. So this idea of dwelling, I find to be just essentially grief shame. I
guess it could be different if, on the one hand, you could be saying to yourself, okay, let's see, let's take inventory. Okay, what was my attachment style? What was theirs? What were the friction points? All these kind of things. But there's also a way in which you could do it, which seems to me more destructive, which would be, what were their problems? Let me really try to find out why they were messed up in the head. Yeah,
and if that bears fruit, which it sometimes does in a false manner, like they're a narcissistic, love-bombing gaslighter, because that's what the internet tells me, then I now have the ability to move on. So, that's another version of it that, which is also potentially helpful to grief, but not helpful to your narrative of self and other. Grinning Cat says, do you have any take on why girls in puberty often start to dabble in witchcraft and boys often develop a love of weaponry?
This is a thing? Girls often dabble in witchcraft?
Right. So that's the first question is, let's question the premise to begin with. Grading Cat says, is this to seek control and esteem? Any response to that, Berto?
Okay, so let me just talk about the boys section here. Weapons. Obviously, I played with weapons as a kid and maybe as a young teen. Like we'd play shoot 'em up games. Not computer games. We'd grab our little pistols and go bang bang and stuff. I played with lightsabers and things. I don't remember a phase though where it was like, okay, now I'm really into weapons. I don't know if that happens maybe here in the States. I don't know. I don't remember that phase. I just remember we would play with guns, play pretend. It was one of the many games we'd play. So I can't, from my own experience, say, oh yeah, that's true. I did have that phase and maybe it was about control. I can't say that. I also am not aware that a significant portion of girls end up experimenting with witchcraft at that age. If it is, I'd be surprised.
Well, yeah, I don't know the statistics, and certainly I don't have my thumb on the pulse of what's happening with teens today. I used to, because I treated a lot of teens, and it was very illuminating especially as an in-home therapist, because the sessions would actually take place in the teenager's room, and you really get a sense for who they are in that situation and what their life is like. And sometimes their friends would be there when I would show up, and that kind of stuff. But I think the larger question is, are women more attracted to witchcraft, and are men more attracted to things like weaponry? And the answer is 100%. In terms of gun ownership or fascination with guns, or how many of the YouTube videos about tanks and warfare, like if you broke down the gender, I'm guessing there would be some overrepresentation of men in the population. And I think the opposite would be true for things like witchcraft and Wiccan and tarot. And sometimes people make fun of me for calling it tarot, but I feel like that's the French student in me. Tarot? Anyway.
I've always heard tarot, but
tarot. Oh, how do I? Anyway, of course, it's not. It's just a bell curve distribution. It's not like only women are involved in witchcraft, that kind of thing. Only men watch YouTube videos about tanks, but there, at least anecdotally, seems to be a distribution of that. And the question is like, why would some teenagers or young adults seek that information? And Grading Cat's like, is this to seek control or self-esteem? And, at first glance, I think the answer is, well, it's not that simple, but I think there is some wisdom to this question, which I don't think I'd ever thought of before. When we lack control and self-esteem, we will search for things and might become really obsessed with things in a way, really into things that provide a solution to that. And if you feel out of control, you might turn to religion of any kind, whether it's Wiccan or otherwise, as a way of trying to gain control over your life. But of course, people turn to religion for a lot of reasons. Or esteem. If you feel out of control, you might also turn to weaponry because it involves aggression and power over others. And you could imagine that being true. But of course, lots of people turn to weapons for other reasons, like hunting or camaraderie with your dad or whatever. So I think, or necessity. Some people live in neighborhoods when it's a matter of safety that you have to carry weapons with you, or everyone in your family gives a gun to every 16-year-old in the family. Who knows? So there's a lot of reasons for that, but it is an interesting way of thinking about things, I suppose.
And maybe it is more endemic here in the United States about the weapons. I don't remember that phase in Colombia with my friends. Maybe I didn't finish, my development there, but it's just like there were so many things that we cared about. None of them were weapons.
No, yeah, me neither. I don't remember any one of my friends, but the general love of, like action movies or
yes, that was definitely a thing. Yeah. And we cared about like martial arts and sports and other things. And then as far as the witchcraft though, I feel like I could make the same argument about, well, more boys are into, heavy metal and satanism and the occult and devilry, because a lot of, I knew boys in high school that were into that stuff, and lots of boys get into that. But I don't know. Like that's the thing I would love to see stats on, because it almost sounds a little sexist to say, women and their witchcraft.
Yeah. But at the same time, there's nothing degrading about being into Wiccan. So it's not really
by our standards, but considering people got burned for being witches for so long.
Yeah, but it's not really. Yeah. Anyway, Your Illusion says, if there was one age that people were required to see a therapist at, what age would that be? Berto, what do you think?
Required. Wow. Well, I personally do feel that therapy should be part of education.
Say it's like a year of mandated therapy. What year would you say?
Oh man, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, because I would say, okay, look, once you get to your mid to late 20s, a lot of people seem to need some guidance. So, but what is that, a work mandated thing? I would also say, hey, maybe when you first get to college, you're in a new environment. There's a lot of chances for you to go astray. You've not really, so maybe that's a good opportunity. Okay, but maybe if you catch the person young, it's also, I do think that therapy should be something that one learns, like meditation, like a lot of other things that we're not taught explicitly, that should be part of the growing curriculum as you grow up, of your curriculum as you grow up. It shouldn't be done at one point. Other than that, I don't know. Maybe, I suppose, 15, but that still seems pretty haphazard to me.
Yeah, as a therapist who's worked with 15-year-olds, not a majority of my career, but there was a time when about a third of my clients were young, and they were almost always 13, 14, 15. I can tell you that a lot of them aren't ready for therapy, and it would be really an aggravation. So if I were to, I guess I'm thinking, well, what age, do you, because you could really capitalize on therapy in your 30s and 40s in a way that you might have a harder time in your teens and 20s. So I'm thinking, well, maybe 35. But then I think, well, if you mandate it at kind of a sweet spot early in life, it could prime you for seeking therapy later. So if I follow that principle, then I would say maybe 22-ish or 25 would be, maybe 20, I don't know, something like that. But if I was to pick a year, I'd say 22. Orla, good old Orla, who is a big presence on Discord, says, do you celebrate St. Patrick's Day? So as you can tell, Berto, we've neglected these questions for a while. But do you celebrate St. Patrick's Day?
I do. I wear something green so I don't get pinched. And I do like me a little Guinness and a little Irish cream. Sometimes I do I mix them. I don't like to say the name of it because I don't like the connotations, but I do like that. And I no longer go to a bar and get uproariously hammered, but I do like celebrating it.
There was one time when you and I had that drink that has a bad name early in our friendship.
That's right.
And then we yelled at each other. We didn't yell at each other. It was on the scale of our fights, it was lower, but it was significant at the time because I barely knew you. And we were already having an argument, sort of a very us argument, if you will. Orla also asks, questions for Berto. Orla says, what are your favorite dad moments?
Oh, by the way, was that at the Mars bar?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. All right. What is my favorite dad moment? Oh, wow. That is a great question. Yeah, what stands out? Obviously, you could say, oh, when they were born, and it's true. Like, there's this moment when my firstborn comes out, and it was a C-section, and she had a little cut on her cheek from the knife. And I'm just looking at her and just witnessing the miracle of the whole thing. And it's like, however, I'm going to go a little more, advanced in years and say, I had this moment where I was starting to feel like my 11-year-old was starting to detach a little bit, like getting to those preteen years, and maybe I'm not that important anymore. Maybe her friends are more important now. And then there was this thing that happened where we had made a big decision of, what she wanted to do for next school year and stuff like that. And she just didn't want to leave my side for like a whole day. And she was hugging me a lot and things. And I just felt like still needed, like, oh, okay. And it also made me feel like she was still little, which is also something as a parent that you, of course, want to see them grow up. But you also, I've always wished I had little versions of each one of their stages, like, a little museum of each one of their things. And of course, I have pictures and videos, but so yeah, that was sweet. It was me feeling like I'm still a worthwhile daddy.
It's like a commercial.
Yeah.
How did being a father compare to with your expectations? So it was prior to 11 years ago.
So before I had kids, I had several friends who had kids. And one of them in particular, my good friend Eric, who was also a bandmate of mine and stuff like that, and I've known him since high school, he really had told me, he had tried to warn me about several things. He's like, hey, listen, just so you know, you got to get ready. Your time is going to change dramatically. You're not going to get a lot of sleep. Your time's not going to be your own. I just want you to know. And I remember being really annoyed. I'm like, oh yeah, thanks. But internally I was like, this is so annoying. Because I felt it was like the parents being in the parent clique and telling me, the neophyte, stuff that I couldn't possibly comprehend. And I just found it so annoying. Like, come on, I'm sure you're not, it's not that bad, or you're exaggerating. Well, no, there was no exaggeration. After I had my first kid, I realized, oh, no, this was real. You don't get sleep. Your time is no longer your own. You're now like basically fully living for these other organisms. So it was definitely, in my mind, I thought of it sort of like more like a pet where you have them, you feed them. Sure. You might take them to the park every now and then. Maybe they have to go potty. Hopefully not on your bed. But other than that, like they take care of themselves, and they might be fun to play cars with, or Barbies maybe, but no, dude, it's super involved. And me being kind of a narcissist and very selfish, that also hit hard. I'm like, oh, I want to be playing video games, or I want to be doing more with my life, but okay, I gotta deal with this, So it was a lot more time, energy, and of course it's rewarding, but it was a lot more than what I was expecting.
What style of parent are you? Orla wants to know.
I don't know if there's official styles, but I would say,
well, stern, passive, involved.
Right. I guess that's so. I'm definitely involved. I like getting on the ground, so to speak. I play. I was just playing Barbies with my little one the other day, and Barbie had to go shoe shopping after prom. I don't know why they went shoe shopping after prom, so I had to drive Barbie and her friend to go shoe shopping. It was pretty fun. But I also do like trying to give the kids structure, because as a kid, I felt like I didn't maybe have enough structure. So I always try to, I do try to draw boundary lines and be kind of firm with some things and set goals for them. I also try to make sure they finish things they start, which is really hard because it's something that's very hard for me. And I it's one of those things where it's classic. I'm trying to avoid passing down the same demons that I hold within me. And so I'm trying to, if they could just be a little more organized, if they could just be a little less this, a little more of that. So yeah, but I'd say I'm a pretty involved parent.
Orla also wants to know, were you hands-on with the nappy or diaper? I think Orla might come from a country where they call them nappies. Were you hands-on with nappy changes, etc., during the baby stage?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the other thing. Okay, so I have a bit of a fecophobia.
It's funny because when I came over the very first time after your first kid was born, I shot some video of that, and there's this glorious video where you're just going into full detail about her very first poop and about
meconium.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that. Well, so the thing is, as a kid, I used to have issues with control. Like, I think because of nervousness, because of probably my mom abandonment issues and stuff, I developed some weird things where I would not listen to my body. And so I wouldn't go to the bathroom when I needed to, and I would hold it extra long, both pee and poop. And this would lead to sometimes having accidents. And that meant that I'd be like in school and I'd have an accident. And it was it's so discomforting, and like poop in my pants. And it was the secret, because I'm like, oh, I can't tell anyone that I've pooped in my pants. And what am I going to do? It's the tragedy of all tragedies. And so I really developed like this really bad association around poop. And then I have to have a baby, and now I got to deal with this. Well, yeah. So the first time I remember like just stealing myself, because I'm like, oh my gosh, this thing comes out of this body, and I have to clean it, and the first stuff is like all mucusy and weird, and like and then over time it just got to be something I could deal with, to the point where nowadays I can even pick up doggy poop. So it was like eating hot sauce or whatever. Like, the more you do it, the more you enjoy it.
Yeah. Absolutely. By the way, so on one of the Discord questions, Alex, he says, Dr. Kirk, did you know there's a video on YouTube of a walkthrough of Issaquah High School in 1988? Just thought I'd let you know if you think the video is accurate of your high school days. So, Alex, I graduated in '89, so if you want to find this video, and I didn't realize it was on YouTube, but I've seen it before, because even back then I knew I needed to sort of grab these kinds of VHS tapes, because I knew in the future I would want to see this. So I actually have a lot of these and have digitized a lot of them over the years. But it's on YouTube. It's called Issaquah High School IHS 1988 Walk Through the Halls. Issaquah High School 1988 Walk Through the Halls. So earlier when I was talking about what it was actually like, you can actually see it, and I just was watching a little bit of it, and at least the way that I would frame it, it's I'm sure millennials and Gen Zers would look at this and be like, oh my God, Kirk, no, everyone has gigantic hair. So I don't know how your eyes would see it, and I'd be curious if you want to email in. But for me, when I see that, I see some people definitely with gigantic poofed out hair. That is, I'm just going to say it, not a great look, or just not something that I would do if I were in their shoes. But there's plenty of people now I will say there's some odd haircuts, like short everywhere except for the bangs for dudes.
Yeah, there were some interesting things like that.
Yeah, and kind of real spiky hair on some guys. But then there's a lot of people with just what I would say just like, just kind of the way their hair falls, if you will. And the fashion is, I guess, particularly 80s, is real voluminous sweaters and frumpy
Were there
pants.
any like punk people?
No, we didn't have a huge punk contingent. There were some punks, but we mainly had preppy people, and we had metal people, and there's also kind of like I don't know how to call it, but kind of the drug kids, if you will. Okay. But it's funny watching this video, like, because I grew up in the same neighborhood since I was in preschool, and I know every single one of those individuals. In fact, that's how I see them.
Wow.
I can't imagine them, because some of them I haven't seen since high school. I can't imagine them being in their 50s at this point,
Right.
And so
they're little kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's really, it's just a little snippet that, someone just takes a camera and just walks around the halls. And but I'm not in it. So, and actually me and my whole friend group aren't in it. So I don't know where we are, but, so there's that. Next question, Berto. Do you have any advice for new parents?
Yeah. Okay. So if you're already past the threshold, is different. If you're about to be new parents, get some help to get out as much as you can before the actual birth. Go to see movies. Go to watch shows. Just be out of the house late, whatever. If you've already got the little kid or kids, then the main things I would say is breathe. Seriously, like consider meditation, because you're not actually going to get that much sleep for real. And not like, oh yeah, it's late nights. No, it's like in our case, we couldn't feed naturally, like breast milk. And yes, I know all the benefits and blah. Trust me, we tried, but it was to try to do it. We were on a 3-hour cycle, and that's like polyphasic sleeping. Basically, every 3 hours, rinse and repeat. You had to sanitize the whole array of stuff. Meant full boiling, full everything, blah, blah, clean it, reassemble it, do the thing, do pump, do this, do the other thing. It was a set of steps every 3 hours. So no kidding, there's not a lot of sleep. So I would say, consider actually meditating, just sitting there meditating and learning how to do it. And 2, related to it, patience with yourself, with your partner, and with your little one, because it's just going to be hard. And it's just going to be hard. There are no magic solutions. Definitely do all the readings, go to the classes, talk to your friends. But when you're in the middle of it, there's no simple answers. It is 3 a.m. in the morning. You haven't slept. The child is crying incessantly. You've done all the steps and you don't know what to do. And so the only thing you could do is breathe, be patient, and you will come out likely on the other side.
Last question. Which was a harder transition, going from 0 to 1 or 1 to 2? Oh, no, sorry. 0 to 1 child or 1 to 2 kids?
Oh, yeah. 0 to 1 for me. Not to say, there are things that I forgot when we got the second one that I thought I took for granted at that point. I'm like, well, we already know how to do that. And then I was like, wait a minute. How did this work? So that was a little tough, especially because ours were almost 5 years apart, like 4.5, more than 4.5, which definitely made it tough. I'm assuming, if you have one and then you have one 2 years later, you probably remember a lot more stuff. However, still, that shock of the first one, and I don't know, maybe it's easier if you are in a part of the world where there is like more extended family and you get that much more help. We were already lucky enough that we had 2 grandmas that were an hour away that could drive up, that could help. And that was already lucky enough. But honestly, without help, I don't know. That is so hard because you're just not used to that level of dependency on you. And it's not something you can just drop on the floor. Literally, like I did drop my kid on the floor, sadly. But like it's not something you can just throw your hands up and say, fine, you know what? I'm taking a night off. Like tonight, I'm just not dealing with the baby. Because when people do that, babies, can literally die and get severely malnutrition and other things and stuff. So, yeah, you got to be there. So that was the tougher one.
Yeah. So anyone out there, if you have more questions for Berto and his parenting stylings, you can email us by going to psychologyinseattle.com, clicking on the contact button, and emailing Berto directly. And that goes for any question for Berto. You want to include that so that when Stacy reviews the email, she puts it in the right file. You can say, this question is for Kirk and Berto, or just Berto, that sort of thing. Yeah,
there were some. I had been neglectful of the Discord for a little bit, and I had missed a few Berto AMA things. There was specifically a post from someone named Bichota, and it was in Spanish, but it was basically that they had heard the attachment episode, and they identified with a lot of the stuff that I was talking about. They grew up not in Colombia but nearby, and so there were a lot of things that maybe similar age or something like that, and a lot of things they could relate. So it's often, I find it interesting that you'll hear these posts of people that heard some episode and could relate and could find some value in it. So I replied, and we had a nice little bonding moment.
All right, let's take a break. Get back. More emails. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Hey, deserving listeners, today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. When you sign up, use the code Seattle16. HelloFresh sends you easy-to-make meal kits delivered right to your door every week. Ingredients travel from farm to your doorstep in under a week, so they're always fresh, all without having to leave your house, which appeals to me because I hate running errands, puts me in a bad mood, to be honest. HelloFresh is super flexible. You can skip weeks when you need to. You can pick your favorites from 50 different weekly options. In our house, we love all the recipes, but some of them that are really great are the citrus beef tacos, their barbecue sloppy joes, and their pizzas. You know, me and my pizzas. So go to HelloFresh.com/Seattle16, that's Seattle16, and use the code Seattle16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. Again, go to HelloFresh.com/Seattle16 and use the code Seattle16 for up to 16 free meals and 3 free gifts. And remember that HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. All right, let's do an OPP, Birdo.
OPP.
So these people became patrons all the way back in April 2020 and have stayed patrons ever since. We have Kristen from Toronto.
April 2020, man. That was tough times.
Yeah. Abby from Mesquite, Texas. Texas. I wonder if it was named after Mesquite or Mesquite was named after Mesquite. You know what I'm saying?
Now, are mesquite related to mosquitoes, or is it?
I don't know. It's a good question. I don't think so. It's
because there's mesquite barbecue, which I like.
I think mosquitoes is M-O. Yeah. Lil Brown is from Florida. We also have Claire, who is an upper tier patron from London. And we have Colin. Good old Colin from Texas.
Wait, is this when Colin came into the picture?
I guess so.
Whoa.
Interesting. But no, he was in the picture way before that.
Okay.
But he didn't become a patron.
I see.
And then we have Nicole, Emily, Beth, my wife, apparently. She became
that's awesome.
Stephen and Nino from God Knows Where. So Stacy Honda from God Knows Where. Thank you all for becoming patrons all the way back.
Oh my gosh, dude.
And staying a patron ever since. I feel like Beth I communicated with, maybe Emily.
It's a super embarrassing thing today, dude.
What?
I had an event at work. And
is this an embarrassment of wrath?
The embarrassment of wrath. So, you know, I show up at work. It's a team event, you know, where we're doing stuff together. And I've only been back to the office. This is my third time being back to the office, and not sequentially. It's been like 2 weeks ago I was there, and this is it. And so I show up, and of course I'm seeing a lot of faces for the first time that I had only seen on video. Yeah. And it's mind-blowing, right?
This is your coconut consultant job.
That's right. Yeah, we do more than just coconuts. There's other fruits, but that's my side of it. But we're sitting there, and I look at one of them, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Kimberly. I thought for a second, I was like, well, it's good that I at least knew Kimberly before the pandemic. But then you're sitting there presenting, and I just realized that this is our first time meeting in person. And I was kind of like gushing about it. And then a whole bunch of people came into the room.
Meaning
like,
you hadn't, you'd seen her over video.
Over video, right.
Oh, okay.
And then a whole bunch of people come into the room, and I'm like, they say, anyone find anything interesting? And I'm like, yes, I just realized that, you know, this is the first time, I thought I had known Kimberly before the pandemic, but I then realized we're just meeting for the first time ever. And then Kimberly kind of under her breath goes, we did know each other from before the pandemic.
Oh, no.
And I am like, wait, what? Are you messing with it? She's like, no. She's like, remember I started in September of 2019. Oh my God. I was
dude,
so
you never say something as definitive of that when the
and
opposite.
I called attention to the whole
but you
room.
definitely don't announce and put her on the spot, you know, 'cause she's kind
oh my gosh, it was so embarrassing.
Because think of where she's coming from. She has this
Right.
brief in office, you know, that beginning of the job experience, and then she's back in the office and she's probably still nervous,
Right.
and then you just call her out as basically forgettable and irrelevant.
Well, to be fair, what I was saying what I was trying to say was that she was such a presence on my project and such a presence online that I felt as if I had already known her. But what sucks is she's like, you did already know
God, I
me.
can't believe I would love to have seen like your face in the first 10 milliseconds after she says that.
I know.
And then the scramble that you went on, because you're
I know.
I don't know if you're a good scrambler, but
I'm a very good scrambler.
Well, yeah, but you're a very active scrambler.
A very active scrambler, yes.
Yeah.
And here's the thing. What happened, the reason I actually got confused is because although it's true, she started in September, I was not working together. We were not working together. So I had met her. I knew her in the office and stuff. It was after the pandemic started, she shifted projects over to the Coconut Project. And then we did this video call, and this I remember vividly, where we were talking about each other's working styles so we could work better together. And so in my mind, that became like when I met her, and then 2 years go by.
Yeah.
And weird pandemic brain goes.
Yeah,
by.
I mean, okay, that's probably what you said in the scramble. I mean, the
I'm just saying
Occam's
that's
razor
what
is you just forgot you had met her in person.
No, I know, but I'm just trying to say why I forgot, because there was this other very salient.
She's not very memorable.
Oh my God, you're screwing it up worse. Damn you.
My story, I think I've told this on the podcast before, but briefly, I was at a wedding, my cousin's wedding. Brian, you know him. And for those of you who go to Antioch, Catherine, she's a professor at Antioch as well. She's my cousin-in-law, married my closest cousin. Me and Brian were like best friends growing up. Anyway, went to his wedding, and it's after the wedding reception. It's during the wedding reception, and most of the people there I don't know, because it's a lot of my cousin's friends and a lot of Catherine's friends, people that I never knew. And so I'm really on the outside among that, age group. And we're in this kind of large circle. People are talking. It's an informal circle social situation. And across the circle, it's, maybe 15 people standing around with their cocktails. Across the circle, this woman, an Asian woman across the circle says, "Honda, how's it going?" and people only call me Honda from high school and my 20s. Beyond that, people just started calling me Kirk, which always felt weird to me. And when you call me Kirk, I will 10% of the time go, "Don't call me Kirk," because it's weird when friends call me Kirk. It's like what the barista will call me, because it's the name I give them or something, or a teacher or something. So everyone knew me as Honda, to the point where in my 20s, in our friend group, people I knew for months, if not years, thought I was like Prince, like I didn't even have another name. They thought that was my first and last name.
That is your first.
Because nobody, even people I went to, because I've been friends with people since I was in preschool. So people I knew my whole life that knew me very well as Kirk, but just at a certain point, we just stopped calling people by their first name. It just felt more familiar to do that in a weird way. Anyway, so, across the circle, this woman says, "Honda." And I look at her and I instantly recognize her, because I never forget a face. I'm very good at remembering faces. I'm not so great with names. And I looked at her and I had this, I was like, wait, where do I know her from? And it was all within half a second. I'm like, well, she's calling me Honda, so it must have been from a long time ago, in my 20s or college. And I definitely know her, and I know she comes from that time, like maybe way back, like maybe definitely like early college. I had this sense. And I also knew that I knew her well, but hadn't seen her since then. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then another half second goes by, and I lock in on someone that fits the bill, and it's actually someone from late high school.
Okay.
And but I can't remember. I don't know if I can remember her name, but I don't call her by name. So I'm just like, yeah. So how's it going? And we start talking across this circle, so everyone else is listening, right?
Everyone's aware.
And I start asking her about her friends, and she's like, huh? And I'm like, well, you know, so-and-so. And she's like, I don't know if I remember that person. I'm like, what are you talking about? And we're going back and forth for a while. And then all of a sudden she says, you don't remember who I am. Do you think I'm someone else?
Oh.
Yeah. And she wasn't being hostile about it. She was just and I, you know, just the sweat just starts pouring out of me because I was already not very confident. And then she says this, and there's all these people watching, and they're all her friends because they're all my cousin's friends. Right? So I'm kind of the outsider, and I'm like, yeah, I guess I do. And what I wanted to say was, but I definitely know who you are. Like I know your vibe. I know your way. I know we spent a lot of time together. I just, you know, and then she tells me, and I'm like, oh, of course, you know, and instantly all of it comes flooding back. I mean, I hung out with her and 3 of her girlfriends for years. I mean, they probably came to every party that I threw. They threw parties. I went to their parties. We hung out probably on average twice a week for 4 years. She dated 2 of my friends, and maybe 3 of my friends actually. And so it wasn't just a casual person in my life. Right. And in fact, the person I thought she was much more distant than me than she was. But the problem, Berto, was this. I did not know she was friends with my cousin. So
context.
Right. So when I see her, like if I saw her at a 20s friend group get together, there would have been no question.
Right.
But the fact that she's this totally out of context, this person that just steps out of this other group and like into my family life, into my cousin's circle, I'm like, my brain couldn't, and especially in that half second I had to decide. And you know, that was about 7 years ago, and I can still feel and sweat about it like it was yesterday.
Oh my gosh, dude. No, I can totally feel you and relate because I've had those at the W. That happened to me more than once at the W. I'm sitting there hanging out, and it's like, Umberto! And I look over, and it's some dude.
Yeah.
Or some gal. I don't know. And
so the W Hotel is a W Hotel, and then we would hang out at the lounge because our friend would DJ there frequently.
And there's tons of people. And like you said, context is everything. Out of context, at the W Hotel, someone from some other context from a long time ago recognizes me and knows my name because they probably had to repeat it 50 times at the time to get it. So like, Umberto! And I'm like, hey! And, you know, the face might look familiar. Although sometimes I was even like, I don't think I've seen this person in my life, yet they seem to know me so well. Yeah. What is happening here?
But, you know, you're out drinking, God knows.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's super embarrassing.
Patron Natasha, whom we've met from California, wrote in and said, why is it okay to make fun of people for being weird or awkward? Isn't being anxious or unhappy with oneself a disability to some extent? I feel like there needs to be a label for this, like social disability or something. It's just strange to me how if someone criticized me for being queer or half Jewish, that would be horrible, right? But if you said I was kind of weird, that's fine. Both are hurtful. What's the difference, Berto? What do you think?
Well, actually, I'm going to take a little bit of a question to the question because I'm not so sure if that is okay. I think humor is okay when there isn't a real power differential. And of course, sure, there's certain types of humor that would still probably not be okay, and that's fair. But, you know, if you're with a buddy and you're both sort of on equal footing and you're razzing each other about, you know, missing basketball shots or being clumsy at the bar or hitting the drink out of a waitress's hand or something. If there isn't a real power differential, I think that's okay. I think in any case when there is a power, and what I mean by power differential is certainly obvious ones like, you know, boss to employee, but it could also be sort of a more senior person in the family to a young, you know, less senior person, or in a friend group, someone that's more well established to someone new, and so forth, right? There's a lot of different power differentials, let alone, racial and social, real established differentials. So if someone walks into a room and is wearing things that maybe are a little different than other people there, or maybe they're walking a little funny because maybe they have a limp because they just twisted their ankle or something, and someone's making fun of that, and it's sort of out of the blue, I don't actually know that that's okay. Like, that still seems aggressive and kind of bullyish.
Yeah. It's an interesting question, and there are a lot of blind spots in our protectorate of oppressed groups. I think maybe this being one of them. Like, there's still a fair amount of body shaming that goes on in society and is not frowned upon nearly enough. Whereas if you just, called someone out because of their ethnicity, most people would be aghast at that. But being quote unquote socially awkward or weird might be considered one day to be one of those groups that is unfair to make fun of. I don't know. But at the very least, the more broad term that I think you're getting at, Berto, is that to be hurtful is to be hurtful, and that's not okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
That's right.
Yeah.
To be hurtful is to be hurtful. I have a few friends, and I've had a few friends in my life that are somewhat socially awkward or, things like that. I would never make fun of them because of that. I would make fun of them because, they ordered the extra large popcorn. They had 2 bites and left the rest. Stuff that doesn't really matter.
More broadly, stuff that you predict is not going to hurt their feelings.
Yes, exactly.
Right. Because there could be someone that could be hurt about the popcorn thing.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that's right. It's like,
and there are plenty of people who would never be hurt at all if you called them weird. Because they're just like, they accept it or they like it about themselves and also the tone, right? If you just called someone weird, as an adoration about them, oh my God, you're so weird. That's so funny. I love your quirkiness, right?
Like, we have a mutual friend that, a while ago, he would say some very odd things. We were in Vancouver one time. He said some very odd questions and things.
Yeah.
I make fun of him. I'm
God,
like,
what was one? Oh, yeah. We can't mention that.
What are you asking?
We can't mention the most epic of questions that he said that one time.
But I never felt, I hope I wasn't hurting his feelings. I was just kind of like razzing him for dude, those are some weird, why are you asking this in this way?
Well, that's interesting because I mean, the degree of razzing that particularly particularly you and Ron went on.
Oh, okay. Maybe we razzed the bridge.
Yeah,
too far.
I could see that being a razz too far. I don't know. Okay. I don't know though. But I could also see him being like, no, I mean, I'm fine. That's just us having a good time. So
I mean, he was razzing me in high school, so I don't know.
2 razzes don't make it right, Berto. Patron Anne Sophie from Montreal says, is it moral to tax unvaccinated individuals during the COVID-19 pandemic? I am a master's student in counseling psychology, and our prime minister just announced that, so this again is probably an old email. Our prime minister just announced that a tax for non-vaccinated people against COVID-19 will come. A part of me thinks that this might help increase fundings for hospitals. Another part of me thinks about marginalized people who don't have access to the vaccine. On the other hand, is it moral to impose our moral values on others and punish those who don't care about our values? Are also non-vaccinated people contribute to the increase of hospitalization. So what is your take on taxing unvaccinated people in Canada during the pandemic, Berto? What do you think? Is it immoral?
Right. Yeah, I don't oppose taxation in many cases for things, like we had essentially a healthcare tax in this country if you don't have healthcare that was imposed. I don't oppose stuff like that. And the reason I don't oppose taxes like that is because I do believe that there is a social burden to be borne by all of us. And I don't believe in this full libertarian idea of hey, everyone should just, deal for themselves and look out for themselves. And I believe we live in a complex modern society that cannot run with just little individuals minding their own business. It depends on a lot of cooperation and a lot of money that has to come from somewhere. So that said, in a global health crisis that was the pandemic, would it make sense and be moral to tax people that are not doing their part? I would probably support something like that. Where it gets a little trickier is maybe there are some gray areas when it came to the vaccine. Like, would you be taxed if you didn't get all 3 boosters? Would you be taxed if you don't get the 4th booster? I don't know, right? But I wouldn't necessarily rule out the idea of, yes, you're going to have to either contribute by immunizing yourself, or maybe at least excluding yourself from society because you're going to be guaranteeing that you work from home or whatever. And or you're going to be helping us with money because this is costing us a lot. I could see that. I don't think it's immoral. I do think people would fight it like hell, though.
Yeah. In the States, my God, they'd be rioting in the streets. Yeah, I don't think it's immoral at all. I could see someone making an argument for that if they saw it a particular way. Some of your questions, Anne Sophie, you're saying like, part of me thinks this might increase fundings for hospitals, which is good. So yeah, that's great if the taxes were earmarked for that. And you say, part of me thinks about marginalized people who don't have access to the vaccine. I mean, the only people marginalization wise who wouldn't have access would be people who are, trouble with mobility and don't have help from the state or otherwise to get to the center to get a vaccine because they're free. So if you're poor, you say, well, I got to work all the time. And there's usually a convenient place that you can stop by on the way home from work. And given how important it is, so maybe am I missing something, Berto, in terms of a marginalized group that,
that it could be a blind spot for us. We're privileged people. We have means and things and mobility. That is possible. At the same time, it kind of like it cuts both ways though, because it's only going to be made worse. So it could, does this mean that there can't be exceptions? Like, hey, look, you're going to be taxed unless you can demonstrate blah, blah, blah. In which case, with the tax money that we get from other people, we're going to send someone to your location to vaccinate you.
Yeah. And the other part of your question, Anne Sophie, patron from Montreal, you say, is it moral to impose our moral values on others? I don't consider it a moral value. A moral value is, no sex before marriage or no gay people can get married. That's a quote unquote moral value. I don't consider it to be moral because it's a harmful point of view and it has nothing to do with preventing harm scientifically, factually, even culturally to a large extent. But so it's not opposing a moral value. It's essentially a government action like this is trying to encourage people to get the vaccination, like get vaccinated, you goddamn idiots.
Right.
Some people need that extra push. We saw this when there were mandates at work, which everyone was like, oh my God, what's going to happen? Because the way it's portrayed with the anti-vax people, it's like they're pretty staunch. But when push comes to shove, there are plenty of people who are just kind of on the fence. And when their job says you got to get vaccinated, they got vaccinated and everything went fine. And there are millions of people who became vaccinated because the government in my country forced employers in certain jurisdictions to force their employees to get vaccinated, particularly in certain industries, as far as I know. So, is that imposing a moral value? No, that's imposing science and trying to reduce harm to everyone else. To be clear, and I know most of you understand this, but if you don't, to be vaccinated not only reduces your risk to others, but vastly reduces the risk to self and those around you. Now with Omicron, it's still different, but it still reduces the risk. Masks also reduce the risk. Do they eliminate the risk? No. Do vaccines eliminate the risk? No. Are there some serious side effects to the vaccine? Yeah. But they're extremely rare, on the level of the lottery kind of rare, meaning that essentially the risk is zero. Because statistically, when you buy a lottery ticket, and it's, 70 million to 1, essentially you just wasted your money because there's virtually no chance you're going to win from that one lotto ticket. Will someone win? Yes. But, also people have all sorts of statistical weird things happen to them, like a shark jumps out of the water and eats them. It's like,
it can happen.
But weird things happen. So it is a matter of reducing risk. And if you don't care about yourself, we do need to worry about others, particularly those who can't get vaccinated. Those people are at the mercy of the public. And if a certain number of people in the public refuse to get vaccinated, they're just complacent and opening themselves up to the possibility that they will literally kill someone because they decided not to get vaccinated.
Right.
Can you get vaccinated and still get it and still pass it along? Yes, but the chances are far less. The statistics are in, and they are unequivocal. They are unequivocal. Unequivocal and unequivocable. Either way, the data is in, not only on the small scale,
it's
on
unequivocal,
individual scale, but on large scales. I feel like the pandemic, in the beginning, we felt the weight of death. And after so much death and so much statistics, I feel like so many, including me, have lost, almost every day I look at the New York Times stats about COVID in Washington State. It has this graph of like deaths and hospitalizations and cases, because we're in right now, as of late April, and middle of another mini wave. I mean, compared to the first Omicron, BA2, but the numbers in this wave are comparable to the other past waves, and, in terms of, I just got my 4th shot, so I feel good, but I'm not fantastic. I don't feel fantastic about my chances, given the chance of me being infected regardless of the vaccine, because it's still the old version of the vaccine. Anyway, what was I saying, Berto? Oh, so I checked the numbers. Why was I saying that? Because I was on a rant. I was on a roll, Berto, and something happened.
You lost the steam. Well, because you were saying that even you get jaded by the deaths and the numbers. So I look at, thank you. So I look at the New York Times, and every day I get a new update of how many people have died in Washington State from COVID. And, it's, let me check. 1. Well, that's pretty low, actually. Daily average, 1 a day. But that's one person, that's a person who died who otherwise wouldn't have died if it weren't for this virus. Every day. I mean, just think, every day, someone in your area dying from something that didn't need to happen and is a tragedy. There are multiple things we can blame. One of us is just nature and the inevitability of these kinds of viruses being passed around. Others can be policy and politicians and individual choice. But, in other areas, well, let me look at just USA as a whole. How many deaths? 400 people in one day in the United States died from COVID. One day. 400. Right.
Now, of course, a lot of people died in the United States, of other causes.
Right.
But this is something that everyone can try to mitigate, and many people have, and many people don't. It's not a matter of imposing a moral value. And again, I'm sure 98% of the people listening right now are just like, yeah, Kirk, we get it. But I don't know. I feel like this is my response to Anne-Sophie's question.
Like we went to Disneyland, and I was worried, and I guess we were in a lull. Seems like we dodged things there. But, we get back. My daughter has like a school trip thing, and a couple students get sent home with one of them at least confirmed with COVID. And my daughter, of course, has to stay home. And then we get scared because she's got a fever. And it turns out, it seems like it wasn't COVID because we tested PCR and 4 other tests came negative, but who knows? And this is right now. And then a friend of mine just again, for the second time, caught COVID again. So it's not like the thing has disappeared. Now, most of the people that I hear have been catching it, they're just having an easier time with it. They're all vaccinated. They're all triple vaccinated. And they're all complaining that it's more like a cold at this point, which is great. But that's not everyone. Like you said, there's still people that are having severe situation with COVID. So it's not out of the woods, or at least it's not out of sight. It's still among us.
Yeah. If I was presented with the option of voting for a politician that would represent me in government and vote for a measure that would tax people who were unvaccinated, I would be all for it, because one, it might encourage a few more people to get vaccinated and will literally save a group of people's lives, including their own, potentially. And it'll punish the idiots for being idiots. Just so tired of people not understanding science, Now, if you have a legitimate reason to not be vaccinated, and I emphasize legitimate, then obviously you'd get a pass on that tax, right? So, for people screaming at their phones, I can't get it because of this reason. Yeah, 100%. I'm sure in Canada that was part of the measure. Percentage-wise, there's very few of those people in a population. And so if everyone else got vaccinated, it wouldn't matter anyway.
Yeah.
Having said all this, Berto, I will say that after, the grand experiment around the world, because different communities have different vaccination rates, right?
Yep.
And even the countries with, much higher vaccination rates than the States still suffered a lot.
Yeah.
It's not a black and white thing, right? It's not like, well, vaccination, we're all good. We didn't know in the beginning that when the vaccine first was starting to be rolled out, it just seemed like, well, maybe if we all get vaccinated, we can just completely snuff this thing out.
But what's egregious and so unfortunate is, it is true that this isn't like a polio vaccine that's just like, no, it's going to work. It's going to work. It's a very gray zone vaccine. It works for some strains, not for others. It seems to minimize symptoms, but not for everyone. Okay, fine. At the same time, most of us, or at least a lot of us, are operating under the reality of, oh, yeah, this was a hard worldwide problem. Science companies came together to try to put something out in the market that could, in theory, help. It seems to help to some extent. It has some problems, things like that. But it wasn't some sort of devious conspiracy. The challenge, though, is that so many people actually, it's not just that they're like, well, if you look at it, it doesn't quite help as much. No, it's actually dialed to 11. The thing is a plot. It's got the microchips. It's going to kill us all. It's the end of the world. It's the mark of the beast, blah, blah. And so that's when it becomes so intractable, because you're like, well, okay, we can't even have a science conversation. Forget that, because we're having a religious conversation. Yeah,
well, and in addition to that, in terms of what I see anecdotally, it's just a lot of misinformation about medical science that was already present about vaccines and
that's true.
Anti-mainstream medicine, this kind of thing. And does the mainstream medicine have its problems? Sure, but it doesn't mean that everything is a fraud. and all the research by thousands and thousands of researchers, they're all in on this grand conspiracy to cover up the true data or something.
I talked about this a while ago, that when my first kid was born, I had been at the time hearing all these things about like, oh, do vaccines cause autism? And I was really worried, legitimately worried, that I would inject my child with things that would ruin their life. Okay. Of course, I was like, well, I'll talk to my doctor and talk to, and read up, right? And where I netted out was, okay, look, I do not like the capitalist motive for everything, because what happens is you end up taking shortcuts. A lot of these vaccines are seemingly being created with not great oversight in other countries and sometimes in this country. And I can't guarantee all the ingredients. And so is it likely that if I inject 10 shots in one day to my child, they might not do so great? Yes. Are they going to catch autism? No. But are they going to potentially get somewhat sick and not feel well? Maybe have some downstreams? Yes. So what I decided with my doctor is like, look, let's not give her all shots in one day, which is a lot of times what they do. Let's just space them out. We'll do 2 this week. We'll come back next week, do 2 more. We'll still do all the shots, do the full series of all the vaccines, just not all of them at once. And that worked well, because one time we actually gave her, I don't remember how many shots in one day, and she was miserable for like 2 days. No, she didn't catch some weird tuberculosis or something, but she was not good. And this little baby. So I actually liked that approach. It was the same thing. You got all the vaccines. You just spaced them out a little bit. And are you rolling the dice that on the day you spaced it out? Yeah, sure. But, I think to me that's a compromise where I did some research, and then I did something that made me, my doctor, and my family feel okay. But that's very different from some other conversations we try to have these days. And that's the thing. It's like, I would be fine if you and I are talking and you're like, I'm not going to get the 4th booster. I'm like, why? Well, it seems like it's just not that effective against the current variants. Well, sure. Like, you may be right, you may be wrong, but that's the kind of conversation I can have and I would love to have with people. Yeah. But as soon as you start telling me that Mars is not in alignment with the Venetian reptiloids, and that's I'm like, come on, get out of here.
Well, again, more commonly, in my circle, it's, you have to listen to this one guy on YouTube. Like he's a physician and he's a researcher. He used to work for the CDC and he believes that da 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 da. So they're following an expert who presumably should know better, but they're led astray by a charismatic idiot.
Did I tell you, I watched one of those videos with one of the supposed inventors of the mRNA technology, and this guy, Brett Weinstein, right? And like, it was this thing, and where they were going to go into depth about the risks of the mRNA technology. But the majority of the content in their video, were anecdotal stories, literally, where they were saying, well, my janitor, he caught it anyways, and blah, blah, blah. And he had a heart attack over here. They were just anecdotes from a couple people they know.
Yeah.
And that was the content of the video.
Yeah, and that's literally, there's a ton of research on this, and particularly now because of what we're going through, because it's so critical that we understand this even better. Generally speaking, without education and understanding of science, people will far outweigh the importance of anecdote than data, when data is essentially a conglomeration of anecdotes, if you will.
Yeah, my buddy was telling me that. I really believe it.
Yeah. There's another bias. We have a bias against taking action versus doing nothing. With the vaccine, it requires you to do something. Mm-hmm. And when we're worried about two things, like, well, if I don't get the vaccine, these risks will happen. If I get the vaccine, these risks will happen. We tend, because we don't understand how to weigh probability or even how to understand probability, or we're being fed the wrong probability, but even if we are fed the right probability, we have a bias against taking action because it's maybe we evolved to be this way or something, that it's better to do nothing than to do something. We have that bias. When you're afraid of A or B, do nothing, because you could imagine us on the African savannah 200,000 years ago. It's like, well, the puma is out there. I can hear him. Do I go that way or that way? Or do I stay here? Well, I'll just stay here and hunker down, and maybe that made us live another day or something. I'm just speculating. I'm just throwing shit out there. But
wait, was this based on true stories that you heard?
Yeah, it's anecdote. I took a time machine and I observed little Grunk in the bush, and I interviewed him, of course.
Hey, is it time to reveal that I'm actually Gronk from the past and you brought me back in your time machine?
You do look familiar.
Yeah.
You've lived a long time.
I've learned the language.
You've aged well. What did you decide to do, by the way?
Cryogenics.
Did you go that way, or hunker down?
You know what? I actually decided to talk it out with the puma. It turns out that pumas just want to be heard.
And then a musical happened,
Yeah, I mean, we sang some beautiful songs. I have scars on my stomach. I lost a kidney, but
All right. Well, if there are any Republican listeners out there or anti-vax people, I commend you for sticking with us this whole time.
Yeah.
So, because I'm pretty sure statistically there's got to be some of you.
We just lost everyone.
Yeah, but I don't want to accuse Republicans, right? There are plenty of Republicans. In fact, I think most Republicans are vaccinated, right? So that's a bad accusation.
The odd thing, right, was that the anti-vax movement before the pandemic was very much kind of a leftist, new agey kind of thing.
Republican, 56% of Republicans. So yeah, most. 75% of Americans.
That's a lot. Although it should be like 90, but okay.
Democrat, 92% of Democrats. Wow, that's a high rate, right?
That's a high rate.
I mean, talk about a difference right there.
Yep.
92% of Democrats and 56 of Republicans. Just because a couple, maybe one politician got a stick up his butt about vaccinations.
Because Democrats are cucks that just, follow sheeple off the cliff. That's why.
Yeah, it's so upsetting. Because we've been researching anti-vaccination statistics demographically for decades, and because there's a lot depends on people getting vaccinated, measles, mumps, polio, this kind of thing. Prior to the pandemic, we had tons of data based on party lines of vaccination likelihood, and there was no difference between Democrats and Republicans prior to Donald Trump opening his mouth about it.
Yeah.
There was No difference. None. Now we have 92% Democrats, 56% Republicans, because one guy who got vaccinated, by the way.
Right. And then promoted and said that it was all his invention anyways.
Who decided to come out against, well, he said a lot of things about vaccines, to be fair, because he probably said, I know he actually said a lot of things that I would actually agree with.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is.
But he also said a lot of crap and spread a lot of misinformation and encouraged it.
He could have actually had a great story, right? Like, look, I pushed for this. We now have a vaccine, the miracle of science. Yeah, it's not perfect, but, let's all get it. Let's do the right thing. Those Democrat libtards are going to tell you, don't get it because it's from me. But we'll show them. We'll show them that we are Americans.
Yeah. That's what I thought would happen. Now, I've talked about this before, but I thought that's, at the beginning of the pandemic, I thought, actually, in one way, this could be a chance for Donald Trump to shine, which would be a good thing for all of us.
That's right.
Which might be a bad thing if he gets reelected, but okay, whatever. And I just thought,
you take the ones you can take.
It's such a slam dunk, like it's so easy to do the right thing here, and you'll be a hero. So imagine if he had come out and there'd be 92% Democrats, 92% Republicans, or probably even less Democrats because...
Yeah, exactly.
So say 88% Democrats and 92% Republicans. Imagine how many lives he could have saved, or at the very least, conflict in our nation he could have saved. This could have been a time where we could have come together.
That's right.
This could have been a time when we all agreed on the heroes. And right now you have, and I know a lot of healthcare workers are out there listening and they'll email in, who are heroes. And literally half the country, or a percentage, a good percentage of the country, due to propaganda from particular politicians and pundits on certain news channels that I won't mention, but you know what it is, rhymes with
CNN,
Slox News, will talk about how, because of that, there's a good number of Americans who actually think that the nurses and the doctors are the enemy, when they're the ones literally not breaking their backs literally, but figuratively breaking their backs to save...
literally cracking their skulls, though.
To save lives in hospitals, in clinics, for everyone, regardless of whether or not they did their part to take the vaccine, regardless of whether or not they believed in the science that is now saving their lives. These are the people working overtime, putting themselves in harm's way, by the way, of getting infected, and some of them dying, too.
Yeah.
He could have been a hero. He could have gone down, George Bush.
Yep.
George W. A lot of people hated him. A lot of people in my city hated him. But for a period of time, right after 9/11,
everyone rallied behind him.
He had astronomical approval rating because, he gave that speech in the rubble.
That's
and he's sitting there with his arms, with his sleeves rolled up, with a bullhorn saying, like, you have, I don't know what he said, but something like, we're going to get you.
Right.
And I, as a non-warmongering libtard from Seattle, I'm like, yeah, because who knows what else they're going to do is find these people and get them to stop to do this,
Right. And at the same time, which seemed out of character, but at the same time, there was a unifying message about, and by the way, don't go after Muslim Americans. Like, this is not their fault. This is like these other people. And yes, we're going to invent some evidence and go and invade another country, but don't worry about that right now.
Well, right. So that hadn't happened yet.
Yeah, I know.
The invasion of the fraudulent WMD invasion of Iraq hadn't started. The invasion of Afghanistan hadn't started.
Isn't it weird? Like, they are ultimately, a lot of these people are their own worst enemies. It's like, you kind of had it in the bag to just keep going. Yeah, I know it was his second term and stuff, but like, oh no, actually, it was
it's his first term. He just got elected.
But the point is, like, you didn't have to walk into jail by like invading a whole other country and ruining that whole thing.
Yeah.
I just think it's like, right now, from here on out, this likely continues. We have different variants, things like that. We have to be able to have the rational conversation of weighing risks. And to your point earlier, it's unfortunate that most of us haven't been given the tools to make those decisions in a rational way. It's just more about who did we hear on what channel saying what crazy thing.
Yeah.
That said, a lot of people did end up getting the vaccine. In spite of everything, a lot of people did end up getting it.
Yeah. Yeah. Including most Republicans, which I think needs to be recognized. barely most, but most, you know?
Yeah.
A lot of people did their part, and we can look at the positive, and I got my 4th shot, and I felt not as invincible as I felt after the first shot I got. After that first shot, man, after the 2 weeks of being inoculated happened, I felt like a superhero. You know, I went from feeling like I was Mr. Glass from Unbreakable, just walking around to feeling like Superman. Yeah, to Bruce Willis. Well, that's probably 30 minutes of annoying talk about that you'll never get back from your life. I don't know.
You could bookmark it.
And I still, when I listen to podcasts and YouTube channels, and when they kind of go off on this, like, I get a little bit of pleasure from it, because I just feel like, you know, obviously there's a lot of emotion. I mean, every day, do you not feel some emotion related to COVID-19? You know, forget about Republicans and Democrats, forget about, you know, anti-vax, whatever. Just the annoyance and the inconvenience and the fear and the uncertainty and the loneliness and the disconnection and the discombobulation. Like, it's a daily occurrence that we're all feeling. And, well, I'll say, hey, y'all, if you didn't like me venting for 30 minutes, that was a rant that clearly needed to happen that I have not been able to do, because I don't think I've ranted like that in maybe like 2 or 3 months. Podcast or no. And so I thank you for allowing me to do that, Berto.
Yeah, well, you got to do it sometimes. Let out the steam.
All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself and get vaccinated, because
you deserve it.